Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Weiwei Dai, a postdoc fellow in Johns Hopkins University, School of Medicine. I'm the moderator for this session, and thank you for joining us to have a discussion for how do I explore careers during graduate school. We're excited to have our panelists, Drs. Juliana Desiderio, Devin Rosenthal, and Christopher Consolino. Audience, feel free to ask questions in the discussion chat box, and we'll open up questions in the last 20 minutes. And to start, maybe could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your career path? Maybe we start lady first. We start with Uyana.
Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate all of you joining, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel. Desiderio, and I'd like to talk about my career path, saying that I'm first and foremost a scientist, and I still consider myself a scientist, no matter what setting I'm in my career. So I've always been interested in science and pursued my dream of becoming a scientist, and graduated a PhD from the Bloomberg School of Public Health Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology in 2008. And as much as I liked science and the lab-based research, I really got interested in what other roles a scientist can play in supporting science and discovery that we make in the lab, and kind of how do we move forward scientific endeavor. Because we were really close to Washington, D.C., I got really interested in science policy and the role of scientists in kind of navigating the both legislative and kind of executive branch policies and regulations that fund and regulate science and medicine in the United States. So I was really fortunate to be accepted in a graduate fellowship with the National Academy of Sciences after I finished my PhD. It's called the Kristen Merzine Graduate Fellowship in Science and Technology. And it was designed to really give fresh PhDs a policy 101, so to speak, and open this door for them and think about all the other things that they can apply their PhD in terms of government relations, business development, and then science policy. So after I did my fellowship, I got a job at a medical association, which is a professional society like probably many of you belong to, called the American Society of Hematology. And I started as a technical expert in government relations, actually, was a registered lobbyist for a while, which was very interesting. Really got to see how NIH is funded, how FDA works, how other federal agencies implement legislation that our Congress passes with regards to science. So that was a really interesting role for me. And then with time, I kind of grew my portfolio and created my own department of scientific affairs, which was really, developing scientific strategies and programming and really injecting science into everything that our organization did. So really enjoyed that role of connecting the dots between the scientists who are doing research and healthcare providers who are treating patients, and then everything else that has to happen for them to do the research or treat their patients. So I then pursued this kind of connecting the dots role in my current job, which is as a director of biohealth and life sciences with the Maryland Department of Commerce, which is, if you think about it, is being a scientist in an economic development agency. I now have to think about science as a driver of economy. So in my job now, I help businesses, biotech companies, of which we have over 500 here in Maryland, to grow, to prosper, to make sure that they are successful in all the technologies that they're working on and treatments that patients are waiting for. So I wanted just to end this with, this is not, I'm still considering myself a scientist. I think about science all the time. I learn about science all the time. I think like a scientist. And to me, this is not an alternative career. This is my scientific career.
Thank you very much, Uyana. Thank you for sharing us and kick off the session. And Devin, would you want to be the next one?
Sure. Appreciate again the invite to present today, and for everyone who's online right now and taking a look at this. I do want to echo something that Liliana just mentioned, which is that while I come from a scientific background, and I'll touch on that in a minute, I think the important part is even though I'm not at a bench these days and working in science in that specific way, a lot of the fundamentals of the way of thinking, the critical thinking approach, the methodology, and then actually the science itself all translates into the work that I'm doing now. So starting from the beginning, did a PhD in cell and molecular biology. I finished it at the University of Michigan, but actually started at the CMDB program at Hopkins. So worked in breast cancer at that stage, went and started a postdoc, as I think a lot of people do, straight out of a PhD program, and realized pretty quickly into that while I enjoyed the science, I didn't see academia as a career path that most aligned with what I was looking for out of the work that I do, the lifestyle around it and all of that. So I was in Boston at the time. It's a good place to have these sort of revelations. There's a lot of networking you can do up there. And so went and did a lot of that. We can touch on that later in the conversation if that's useful, but ended up ultimately jumping from academia into industry and from bench research into clinical development. So I joined a small biotech, Boston Biomedical Incorporated, doing cancer stem cell drug development work. So immediately jumped in and learned about clinical trials and running those and kind of that side of what happens post-bench. Was there for a little bit before taking a brief contract position at Novartis in their companion diagnostics unit in their oncology division. I can touch on some pieces of that later on as well, but basically a chance to kind of step back to the bench and really confirm for myself that that's not where I saw myself staying. After that, though, made a jump both company-wise, but also geographically from the Boston area down to North Carolina and joined a contract research organization, or a CRO, called RO, where I worked in a, broadly speaking, a product development role, which means I worked in regulatory affairs and you can say sort of clinical development. Basically, how do you take products from the bench and ultimately get them approved? That full process of going through FDA, of building out clinical trials, of the mechanics and operations around all of that. I spent just about 5 years there. And during this time had some additional revelations. I can tell you the nice story of how it all kind of comes together in the end, but in reality, this is a lot of exploration, a lot of self-discovery, and a lot of willingness to pivot along the way. So actually went back to school and did an executive MBA at UNC Keenan-Flagler down here in North Carolina. And the important part of the executive part is not that it's fancy. It means that you get the privilege of working and going to school at the same time, which was a process in and of itself, but allowed me to move more into the business side of things that had become interesting, was sort of a continuation of the trajectory I had set to that point, and allowed me to formalize and kind of solidify some things around the financial side, I guess broadly speaking, business side of the industry. Went and took a position while I was finishing up that program at a strategy consulting firm that focuses in the life sciences, Triangle Insights Group. Spent a year there cutting my teeth on the business and commercial side of the biotech industry before joining NovaQuest, the investment firm that I'm at now, earlier this year. So currently a senior associate at NovaQuest, work in our due diligence function, broadly speaking, which means that I get a chance to look at investment opportunities that come in, do some initial screening around those, and then for any that pass that screening, do a full-scale diligence process around them, which accesses the scientific background that developed during that PhD program, as well as all the operations, commercial and such, to really understand, are these products and are these companies good investment opportunities? And I'll just touch on by saying, as opposed to venture capital firms, which maybe some folks are familiar with, NovaQuest invests in later stage products and companies. So we invest in products that are in phase 3 clinical trials or early commercialization.
Wow. Thank you, Devin, for sharing with us your experience. And I sense that you left out some interesting experience, and maybe we'll come back to that later. And Christopher, how's your background and career path?
Hey, well, I want to echo my fellow panelists and be very grateful for being included. I think it's such an important event, and so it's great on the other side to see this happening. I'm repping the humanities here. I got my PhD in history from Johns Hopkins in 2019. But like both Devin and Uliana, although I'm not writing what I would consider works of history right now, every day I'm using the skills that I acquired as a historian. And it's been a great perspective to have in my career. So I'm only about a year into my alt-ac position, which given 2020 kind of feels like it was a decade ago that I joined EAB. But I'm a senior analyst and I do best practices research. So I effectively get on the phone with presidents, provosts, cabinet leaders at universities. I play business therapist. They tell me what their problems are. I figure out what the common problems across the sector are. And then our teams work on 3 to 8 month time horizons to come up with really scalable solutions. So we're not really working with one client. We're thinking, okay, shared services is a common problem across universities. How do we design kind of light lift, high impact solutions to these common problems? In terms of making the transition from being a historian in a traditional sense to sort of being a secret historian in the private sector, I really decided that the academy wasn't for me, probably in the twilight of my graduate career. It was looking at the realities of the job market, wanting a little more control over where I lived, looking at potential income insecurity given where enrollments in the humanities are, but also thinking that a 5-year time horizon wasn't really for me. I like the pivot from project to project, and so if I had done the tenure track, I'm talking about another 3 to 4 years with my dissertation, and I was ready for something new. And consulting kind of provides me with that nice turnover. Hopkins had actually gone through a strategic planning process. I think in my second year, that ended up being really controversial and tensions were pretty high for those 2 years. And I think in retrospect, when I was looking at the non-academic job market, I realized that I was really interested in strategic planning and change management. And that's part of what I think drew me to consulting, but specifically EAB, which tends to have a strategy and change management bent to it. And so happy to answer questions about the early process since I'm so proximate to it.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. That's you're a historian, history PhD, which really adds a diversity to this panel also. So yeah, thank you again for everyone to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your career path. And I think everyone mentioned that we all appreciate the background of PhD, and Wiana said like still, even though that she's working on the policy side, that she still think that she's a scientist. And I think all of us have this in our mind. But still, I think when we start to explore the career option, the conventional saying about this is still, oh, are you choosing academia or industry or something else? And sometimes it can be awkward to study outside of academia roles while in graduate school, and especially because some advisors or PIs can be unsupportive. And what ideas do you have about how to deal with this kind of challenges in graduate school? Who wants to start first? I see.
I can go ahead and jump in here.
Okay, thank you.
Start the conversation. Yeah. I guess the unhelpful perspective here would be that your PI's job, in addition to getting papers out, I don't necessarily know all the humanities equivalents, but getting publications out, I assume is probably part of all of this. Part of it is your development as a student and as in your career as well. I said this is unhelpful because it's great to sit in the panel and say that this should be the case and they should have your best interests in mind, but I realize that's not always the case. And so that being said, it's incumbent on you to figure out what it is that you're looking for and find ways to go and access that. And maybe that's through just some additional reading to understand what do these different career paths look like. I think there should be a level of introspection because oftentimes, at least I know in my own experience, I go looking for what career path am I looking at, but the real question was, what am I interested in and why am I interested in those things? So in grad school, working in cell and molecular biology, working with cells and microscopes and all of that, it wasn't until really my postdoc that I stepped back and said, what is it that I really like about this? Because I obviously enjoyed the data, I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed the experimentation, but what are those underlying fundamentals that I like? And where does it make sense for me to then go and explore? And so to get back to the core of your question here, I think, like I said, it's up to you to go and access these other pieces. I think there's an education component of going out and reading about it, but really nothing beats going and talking with people or being involved in groups that are doing these things you're interested in. And so finding time outside of the lab, in the case of the life sciences, to go and whether it's networking groups, whether it's professional organizations that have events that you can go and attend, just get that exposure to understand, okay, what does industry look like? What does consulting look like? What do people with my current credentials and what I see my future credentials being, what are they doing these days? So getting out there, talking with folks, LinkedIn stalking and the like. I'll pause there because I can certainly go on forever about this, but definitely some initial thoughts there.
Echo what Devin said, and I think it's important to think of it that it's a marathon, not a race. And so you're not going to spend necessarily a summer just completely pivoting away from your dissertation, and that's how you're going to find a non-academic job. It's carving out, consulting club, is having someone come and speak. Go to that for an hour. You can take the hour away from your dissertation. I think something that was important for me too is, like Devin, to think about what I enjoyed, what that might mean in terms of activities that were outside of the academy, and then working up to job ads rather than starting from a specific job ad and trying to work backwards. It's finding what's the right fit for you, not sort of contorting yourself to, what one job ad at one company wants for a specific position.
Yeah, I would like to echo everything that was said here. And I just want to point out that, I know it sometimes feels awkward and it's easy to think that you're not being supported, and hopefully you're not being supported. But as Devin said, it's important to realize that our PIs, I remember my PI and she was like, gosh, I wish I could help you, but I just don't know anybody in science policy. And she felt bad that she couldn't, write me a recommendation letter for a postdoc. And I think it's important to realize that, these are very different kind of networks and skill sets and all these things. And hopefully you're here, you're part of this event, which is more than I can say for myself when I was in school. I mean, this was days before LinkedIn or anything else like that. And, it was kind of word of mouth. We meet people either, in the hallways. I mean, I found out about this fellowship that I pursued through another graduate student who happened to have. So, it was really, really kind of difficult, like you said, to find opportunities to even know where to look. But I think that you being part of this event, you networking, and you're kind of figuring out, perhaps not even just if you don't know, what it is you want to do. And I think that what the exercise that sometimes I go through, even in the middle of my career, is, you kind of start thinking about the kind of things you like and the kind of things that you are good at, right? Like your perfect job is a combination of those two things. And I sometimes would just go through a bunch of job descriptions for people doing different things with a PhD, regardless of their discipline. And I would look at the bullet points in the job description and see if they speak to me. And sometimes I would copy and paste it in a Word document that's called Liana's Perfect Job. And I just say, this is really something interesting. And perhaps it's not something I know how to do right now, but this is something I want to know how to do. And I think that it's okay for you to kind of think about, opportunities that are out there, the things that you want to do. And it's okay to pursue them because you have plenty of skills and you have plenty of experience through your PhD. And we can talk about that later, about how they translate in the real world. And I certainly didn't appreciate that, but you can always learn on the job. You don't have to have every single skill that the job description or somebody talking to is asking for. A job description, remember, is a wish list. I don't know a single person who has hired, and I certainly haven't hired a perfect unicorn that met every bullet point on the job descriptions that I put out. But I think it's important to see what people are doing and seeing if you would be interested in this, or even just trying it out, whether that's on a volunteer basis or a fellowship basis or an intern basis or whatever. But I would agree with Christopher. I don't know about you, but I was so focused on finishing my research and writing my thesis that, it's to me, that was my priority. I really focused on getting my PhD and getting my thesis in. And that for me left very few free hours to kind of looked around. And I have to say that I kind of stumbled into this science policy thing because, like I said, I just happened to do a rotation in the lab where a student has done that. And also at the time when I was I was still on a foreign visa. There are very few opportunities for international students to pursue postgraduate training outside of maybe even academia. So again, it's kind of narrowed the funnel of my opportunities, which was lucky for me that, that they all worked out for me. But, it's a little bit of luck, it's a little bit of hard work, and it's a little bit of just try it out and see what works, what sticks.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I think that we first get a little bit more idea about how to explore some other options during graduate school. And I think all of you mentioned that to explore something out of the academia, which is the environment we are in during graduate school, that you start with going to seminars or talk with other peoples and to have some coffee chat maybe. And so I think networking is especially important here. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you built your network from graduate school till now even? Who wants to, maybe Christopher, do you want to start?
Sure.
So, thank you.
I think I've done a much better job at this outside of graduate school than inside, because my priority really was about finishing my dissertation, and most of the people I ended up speaking to were other graduate students who were perhaps interested in other careers. So partial networking in a way. I've done it primarily through word of mouth, mostly because I don't like cold calling people. For me, writing those emails is like pulling teeth. That said, it is very important to do. And happy to talk to anyone or talk a little further about kind of my strategy for managing that stretch and reaching out to new people. But I like structured ways of building a network. So when I got to DC, I started volunteering with this organization called Compass Consulting, which takes volunteers from across consultancies, law firms, puts them together in teams of 8, and you do a pro bono project with a local nonprofit. And so volunteering can be this really organic way of building a network. Also talking to, just sort of finding on LinkedIn other PhDs who are in the private sector. I think LinkedIn has actually been a really useful tool for finding people in the private sector, just because as your network grows, it gives you these little recommendations. And so having the luxury of being in a very large city in which people are kind of naturally predisposed to networking, that's been really easy. I've tried to kind of set up Zoom calls since we can't do coffee chats. I would usually ask for an informational interview before the COVID times. Now I think it's so important to have the kind of video connection there. But I think that that's all to say, there are multiple paths you can go down the networking. For mine, I tend to prefer either those kind of structured opportunities through volunteer efforts, or sort of finding someone with a similar path, reaching out and just having coffee. And I think it's important to just reach out beyond just because they got a PhD in a different area. We think very siloed ways about our paths. But I think this panel goes to show that reaching out to someone with a PhD in the hard sciences is going to have very useful things to say about alternate career planning. Same with sociology. Those kind of critical thinking skills cut across all these disciplines.
Yeah, just to jump in on this, the cold calling thing, it's definitely uncomfortable, and I don't know that ever really changes. I think where it can get a little bit more comfortable, other than just through repetition, which I definitely recommend, is you have a great advantage being in graduate school in that you don't really have another agenda other than curiosity. If I'm reaching out to someone at this stage in my career, I still do that plenty, but it carries a different weight when you're coming from a company and you're coming from a background, and sort of what is the conversation to be had here, versus in graduate school or as a postdoc as well. When I would reach out, I could just say, look, I'm really interested in what you do. I found your profile on LinkedIn because I was looking at, what the heck is a chief scientific officer? I think biotech sounds cool. I don't exactly know what the difference between that and pharma is. Can I buy you a coffee and can we sit down and chat? Or I guess these days, can we Zoom and chat there? And I'll tell you, the worst thing that I've ever heard is silence. I've never had anybody come back and say, why are you contacting me? Who do you think you are? What is it? No, the worst that I've gotten is people haven't responded. And that happens plenty. But I've made a ton of great connections, some of which are just good informational sessions where you learn a little something, it shapes your vision and shapes how you go forward. And in some cases, there's people that I still very much keep up with to this day. I've referred some of them for jobs, they've referred me for jobs, and help each other on projects. In some cases, we've worked together. But point being, kind of going back to the previous question as well, it's about that targeted serendipity. You go out there with a goal in mind, go out there in a targeted fashion to say, I do want to learn more about either what I can do with this PhD or what this section of the workforce looks like or what have you. But it's oftentimes that serendipity element that comes from that's what gets you the most value out of these interactions.
Yeah, for me, I have to say, if I were honest with myself, I really didn't network in the classical sense that we think of networking right now. When I was in graduate school, again, I was so focused of just getting through my research, and just troubleshooting. And that's why I think scientific training really prepares you for searching for a career, because we're used to, I wouldn't call it failure, but we're used to think of not working and trying again, right? You tweak your experiment, you make sure your controls are right, and you just try it and try again. And that's why I think, cold calling has never, I never felt as comfortable as without an introduction. So things like this, attending conferences, knowing people, saying, could you introduce me? Oh, you know who you should talk to. Could you introduce me? Could you send an introductory email saying that, I'm so-and-so and I will be contacting them. But on the other hand, I've done a lot of cold kind of emails saying I found you or I heard you speak at this conference or I read your paper and I really want to talk to you. And as Devin said, I never got any kind of pushback. Sometimes it's just silence, but I will tell you, I was shocked and awed by the people who agreed to speak with me. If I just asked for 15 minutes path. And as you can tell, people love talking about themselves. And if you just ask them how they got to be where they are, and you're interested in the kind of skills they had, or just path, or any advice that they might have, it's a worthwhile conversation. And as Christopher said, I was also in Washington, D.C., where networking is kind of a second nature. An informational interview, which those two words I never heard put together like this. But when I got to DC, everybody's doing an informational interview. If you say, may I have 15 minutes for an informational interview, everybody knows what that is. Everybody says yes. DC is a very networking town. And, your goal was always, you have 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whether it's a call or video these days or coffee. And your goal is to kind of learn about what this person is doing, ask for any advice you particularly have. And your goal is to ask, who else should I be talking to? Your goal is to walk away with 2 more names. And that's how when I was during my postdoctoral fellowship, when I was doing the science and technology thing, that's one of the things they taught us, is how to do an informational interview. Is, this is how you ask, and this is, if you have an introduction, great. If not, you just cold email or call. And then your goal is to, walk away with 2 more names. And eventually, I have to say that it took me a little while to find my first job, probably about 6 months or so. But in the end, I was always joking with my friends, is that I made the full circle. Because in the last series of informational interviews until I found my first job, the 2 names that I would get at the end are the people who I already spoke to. And that's when I knew that, I did things right, and at least I got to speak to, and since then, really my network has grown. And I think that in traditional networking sense, I don't think I grew my network or thought of networking until I actually was in my first job. So I think that there are a lot more opportunities to do networking now, but introduction always helps. Cold calling is okay. Just get out there and talk to people. You'd be surprised how willing people are to give you their time. And the only thing that I always ask in return is that 5-10 years from now, when you're in this position, you return that call too.
Absolutely. And just one point I just want to reemphasize that I think we've all touched on here, like, you will be uncomfortable. And I've seen too many people that use the fact that they feel uncomfortable about reaching out to folks, and whether that's, cold calling, emails, and LinkedIn and such, or whether that's going to some event and walking up and shaking hands with people. Don't use that as an excuse that you feel uncomfortable and so you shouldn't be doing that. All of us have felt uncomfortable. All of us probably still feel uncomfortable with that. There's nothing like being at a conference back when people used to actually be in the same room as each other, and you have a group of people, you want to talk to that one person, they're kind of standing in a circle, and you have to do that awkward go up and wedge yourself in there. It's just part of the game. Everybody knows what it's about. Everybody feels uncomfortable about it, but the rewards far outweigh any sort of risk that you have there.
And hearing this kind of reminded me too that I think, especially during COVID right now, and just the state of economy, how important networking is right now. So a lot of companies like consulting that are usually on very regularly hiring schedules, that's not the case. We had my position open up for maybe a week in August when usually it's a standing job ad. So even too, they're going to, someone doing an informational interview with someone is going to give you industry knowledge. They might say, we haven't advertised this, hiring is frozen for the next 5 months, then you don't end up submitting an application for a position that's never going to be filled. And so just given the vicissitudes of everything right now, it will help you not waste time down the line. And I've been very willing to share that with people who talk to me. I've talked to other people in consulting who are very open with prospective applicants who don't even have to ask about a job, but I'm always very sort of willing to kind of spill the inside beans about HR and hiring, and other people seem to be the same.
Yeah, I think all of your words are very encouraging. Also, I think all of you kind of answered my next question, which is about cold emailing or LinkedIn messaging, because now it's more and more used as a way to learn about other careers or connect with people that you didn't know before, to do an informational interview. Like Devin mentioned, yeah, the worst scenario for a cold email or a cold message is just silence. And there's really no other worse scenarios than that. So the next question is then, I think Uyana also mentioned that there's something that maybe you guys could talk about, is that how to translate your PhD skills to some job positions that in the industry world, and also what skills do you wish you had developed or experienced you wish that you had previously?
Sure, maybe I can start again. I do informational interviews probably twice a week. I'm very passionate about helping people navigate their career paths and find their forever job or forever path. And I joke that I kind of pivot myself every 10 years, but I still consider myself as a scientist. Long story short, okay. So I talk to people all the time, whether they are master's students or PhD students or postdocs, who ask me this question of whether they need another degree to do something that I'm doing. And my answer is always no. I mean, unless you want to pursue IP law or something, or if you want to maybe pursue some, I don't know, maybe entrepreneurial activities and want to be CEO, maybe you need to go to business school or law school. But to me, I didn't appreciate until I was kind of out of my PhD training of how much my PhD training prepared me for success in whatever career I chose. And I think it's because when you're in the middle of this training, it's kind of being in an eye of a tornado or something, because you can't really see outside of it. There's so many of people around you that are the same. You're at Hopkins maybe, or in another university, you're around a lot of smart people and they're doing kind of the same thing. And you have to understand that in outside of the academia, it's a very different setting. And the kind of training that you went through in terms of your graduate training, very few people have. And I will tell you the things that I use all the time, right? Finding information. You guys know how to find papers, how to find primary literature. Reading and understanding what the primary literature says, right? Analyzing this data and hopefully translating it into plainer English if you're talking to somebody who's not another scientist. Drawing conclusions and maybe providing recommendations. That kind of training that you already have is you're gonna use that in every job you pursue. Written communications, you know how to write abstracts, you know how to write grants, maybe you know how to write review articles, you've written your thesis, you know how to write. oral presentations. Hopefully your training had provided you with opportunities to do a journal club, to present at conferences, to present at your lab meetings. You keep a notebook. You know how to, keep your thoughts organized and then go back and be able to understand them. All of those things you already have. And everything else, like even in science policy, people ask me all the time, well, do I need to have an MPA? And I said, no, I learned everything about science policy on the job. It's okay to learn some things by doing. And it's not like learning science, R&D in the lab, hands-on. It's a very different skill set that you can learn by just doing. And all it takes is thinking through all the skills that you have and presenting them in a way that speaks to people who are not other scientists, who perhaps are hiring you or who you're talking about in terms of your network. And most people who have a PhD or work with a lot of PhDs know that you have those skills, but you have to understand what those skills are, and you have to be promoting of yourself a little bit. I know it's very uncomfortable for all of us sometimes, but you have to understand that, there are some skills that you already have that are very solid, and all it takes is a serendipitous or a person who will be like, which is like what happened at my first job. Is I walked in and somebody wanted 3 years worth of science policy, and that was on the job description, and obviously I didn't have that. And my boss, who I worked for many years and who still is a friend and a mentor, said, you know what, you have a PhD in biochemistry. I will teach you everything you need to know about science policy, because I don't know any of the science, and I'll teach you everything else. And all it takes is that one person to take you under their wing or give you an opportunity to get those skills. And if you work hard, just like you did for your PhD or for your postdoc, you will succeed. So I know I've been speaking for a long time, but I just want you to all walk away from it. If you remember one thing from this, from me at least, is that you have what it takes to succeed. And it's just about finding the right fit and understanding what skills you already have outside of the lab.
I'd like to agree wholeheartedly. I think one of the most important part of you have these skills, you're just not used to communicating them to a different audience, right? When I say conference paper, everyone on the line knows exactly the skills that go into that. I pitched something to an audience, it was accepted. I prepared a speech, I gave that speech, and I fielded questions. When I tell people at EAB that I delivered a conference paper, they really don't know what's gone into that. They think, oh, maybe I got up and talked for 20 minutes. And so learning to, almost like explaining to a younger cousin what your PhD is, that I looked at the following number of sources, I analyzed them, and I presented to someone. And in terms of acquiring new skill sets, I think we're just in such a highly credentialed career path. It's easy to think you acquire skills by getting credentials, which is just not the case. And so I think that it might be the case sometimes, but I think it's important to approach this as, what is the path of least resistance? Don't do an internship just for the sake of doing an internship so you can say that you did an internship. Do an internship because that was the easiest way to get a sense of the legislative process in the city of Baltimore.
Yeah, so to chime in on a couple points here. So as the fool who did go back to school a second time, I can tell you, first of all, that wasn't a decision that I made lightly, and nor would I consider it a necessary decision. So I did the PhD, went back and did the MBA because one could move into the business side and the finance side specifically. It was probably a 2-year debate that I had of, do I do this or do I not do this? In the end, I decided to, because the value add was always going to be there. The necessity may not be there, but would it ever be a negative? No. The timing was right for me to go ahead and commit time to something like that. And I looked at it more as something that ideally would accelerate, but maybe not necessarily be a replacement for experience. And to bring that all back to kind of a core point here, it's about taking what you develop in your PhD and in your experience there and figuring out how to position it, how to articulate that positioning, and how to substantiate it in some fashion. Right, you have these critical thinking skills that you're developing. I think as a PhD in the life sciences, certainly you are comfortable with dealing with uncertainty, even if you maybe don't realize that. You're taking all this disparate information, synthesizing it into some sort of coherent thought, and then taking action based on that and developing your experiments or developing your approaches that you're doing. These are all great skills. I think it's important that you emphasize that when you're looking into different positions or different segments of industry or what have you. It's also important that you're able to substantiate that in some way. And maybe that's just by demonstrating understanding of, I'm going to keep on using examples, specific to what I've been through, but to show that you understand what, say, clinical development looks like because you've gone and done reading on that. Or if you're lucky enough, maybe you had a chance to get your hands messy with that in some fashion. I know that there's consulting groups, for example, or consulting clubs at a lot of universities, and I think Hopkins is among those, where you can get a chance to actually run through some consulting projects there, if that's something that you're interested in, to show that not only do I have these skills, but I've been able to apply them in some fashion to show that I can do these other things that I'm looking into, if consulting is what you're looking at there. This wasn't during grad school, but during some of my work experience, I actually started an LLC on the side to allow me to do some independent consulting because I realized I was interested in the business side of life sciences. I knew that I could develop some understanding around it, but wanted that sort of proof of concept that, hey, I've done some things to get my hands dirty. And so had a chance to work with some companies on the side to help them develop business plans, to work with some investment firms to help them with some very, light due diligence that certainly wasn't the same experience that I would get doing that full time, but gave me talking points in subsequent interviews to say, yeah, I have this background, I am a scientist, but here's how I've managed to go and apply this in some ways that can help you believe that I'll be able to do this, for your company or your firm.
Yeah, thank you for everyone. Yeah, I think that we probably won't notice how valuable our PhD skills are until we start to pivot those skills to apply them into other areas. And okay, so as I mentioned before, for the last 20 minutes of this session, that will open up to the audience to answer some questions from them. And we already have lots of questions posted in the discussion chat box. And so the first one I have here is that, how did you all know about your path best to fit you? And any tips if you like multiple career pathways, and how did you choose?
I can start with that because that's easy. I did not know my path, okay? It's really interesting as I was thinking about kind of my introductory comments. We all at this point of our career, at least at the point of our career, I have this narrative about how I got to where I was, but I'm very conscious of the fact that, we create this narrative around our experiences, right? In my particular case, it's not like I had this great vision of where I was going to be in 10 years. And, I really get really nervous when people ask me about what do you want to see yourself in 10 years? Because if I had to answer, if I answered it, whatever I answered 10 years ago, I'm obviously not doing that right now. So it doesn't really matter. But anyway, so to me, it was a matter of necessity. Listen, I needed a job. I was finishing my PhD. I was not interested in doing a postdoc in the lab. I was looking for other opportunities. This is the first opportunity that came along that I was eligible for, and was very grateful to be accepted into this fellowship. I pursued it, and I was very lucky that it worked out for me, that I really actually liked science policy. And then, like I said, I looked for a job for a little bit, but I found it, and I worked really hard, and I grew in that career. And so, yes, I was interested in all these other things and business development, clinical development, but you just gotta try something. Just go ahead and do it. Outside of your PhD training or postdoctoral training, nothing really has to be 5-7 years. You can try something for a year and a half or a couple of years, and then you can try something else. It's especially in DC, as we all know, people jump things a couple of years. It's not a bad thing. It's not the same as in academia where you're kind of expected to stay in one place for a little bit, but just try something, see how you like it, see if you're good at it, see if it gives you, gives you pleasure, gives you, gets you up on a rainy day, and see, and just learn and get new skills. And even if it's not a good fit for you, you would have learned something. You would have learned something, you would have worked away something, you would have, made new connections, and you can pursue a different path if that's something you're doing something in your job that you really like, but there isn't an opportunity to grow in that area, well, then you pursue that in a different setting. So I'm a big proponent of just, getting out there and like Christopher said, don't do something, don't collect degrees, don't collect experiences or pieces of paper. Just go out there and do things and see what it is that speaks to you. And it's really not, your path is what you make it. And trust me, 10 years from now, a nice story to tell how you got to where you were, even if you weren't trying to get there in the first place.
Yeah, I'll add some similar pieces, but offer a slightly different approach to it. I don't like the idea of what's your 10-year goal in terms of it being something definitive, but I always like it as something that you have at least a concrete enough abstraction that it keeps you focused. And so I think if you go in with the premise that I have where I want to be in 10 years, and I know that is wrong, I know that is not where I will end up, but it leaves me with enough optionality in the present that I'm not cutting off too many other potential paths, but enough direction that I'm actually working towards something. And so, early on for me, that was, I want to be a professor. And so what do? You make sure that you have the scientific bona fides to be able to do that. You make sure you develop in the lab. And those were the skills that I didn't take towards the professorship, but they are skills that set me up well to move into industry and take that first job in that space. That eventually evolved to, okay, somewhere down the line, I would love to be the CEO of a biotech company. That's the long-term goal. And while maybe I'll end up doing that still, that's currently not the path that I'm on, but the skills that I work towards there of, all right, how do I get some management experience? How do I understand more about the financials underlying biotech companies? Those sorts of things that I didn't know as much about. That's what set me up well for the subsequent positions that I took and the position that I'm in now. And so it's just about a way of taking some of that tremendous opportunity space and narrowing it down enough that you're able to put some directionality to what you're doing. I do want to emphasize a point that Oleana made, which is, I know a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of grad students I've talked to and postdocs that are looking at that first position, and they're very worried about how that anchors them for the entirety of their career. And just to emphasize the point, your first job out of school is unlikely going to be the position that defines the rest of your career, and certainly not the one that anchors you to that specific path. I know the first job that I took in industry was one where I will say was not entirely enthused about the company, but I saw it as, hey, this is a way to break into this space that I'll learn more about. And maybe I'll end up retiring at that company. Maybe I'll end up leaving them after a year, almost to the day. But either way, I'm going to get some valuable experience along the way, and that's going to be something that I'm able to leverage moving forward. So, I'm not saying just take any job, and I'm not saying if there's major red flags that you should move forward with that, but experience is valuable. People do change jobs. It's okay. And you're not going to, again, anchor yourself down by taking a position and close off every other opportunity that exists.
Well, before Christopher start his answer, I just want to say there's some audience specifically interested in your decision, quote unquote. He said that you have pivoted more suddenly and dramatically from your PhD topic. And he or she wants to know that how did you make that choice?
Well, I'm definitely not working on 17th century English coinage anymore. But even in terms of getting into consulting, it was probably a 4 or 5 month timeline at the very end. I'd actually not planned to apply for jobs until I had defended, because I was just really focused on finishing the credential. I completely lucked out, and that I got the first job I applied for, and I was excited about the company, and it happened through an informational interview. I had an informational interview with someone. I sent them my resume. We talked about the company. I think one of the most important questions to ask, and this dovetails a little with what Devin was saying about your 10-year goal, is ask them about their day, right? Describe the average day in your role. And if it sounds like something that you would like to do, that's probably a really good fit job. And so with consulting, I really liked traveling to archives. Consulting is a higher travel career trajectory. I like a higher turnover in topics. Consulting has a fairly high turnover in topics. And so you can match yourself to effectively a workday rather than a position, a company, or a career. But getting back to the kind of pivoting, Luckily with consulting, there are a lot of really structured ways to explore the career. So I had participated in, it was by the Boston Consulting Group. They have a Bridge to BCG program, which is a song and dance. You apply, they bring you to one of their offices for a week. You get to hang out with a lot of other PhDs who have gone into consulting. For me, that was sort of real confirmation that this was the right career for me. I think too, just explore the opportunities as they arise. I was kind of afraid if I was locking myself into something by taking the job at EAB. I didn't necessarily want to be in education for the rest of my career, but it was a field that I was interested in right now and felt like I had a lot of sort of soft and hard skills that I acquired over the course of my PhD. So I took the interview. It seemed like a good job. It's great for now. It might not be what I do for the rest of my career. And again, you don't have to ask for a job. Don't ever ask for a job in an informational interview. But you don't have to. Just think of it as a fun conversation. You're all very interesting, passionate people, and that really comes across in these kind of interviews. And someone might walk away thinking, I would really like to work with this person. They'll send your resume to HR, and then a week later, I got an invitation to begin the process. The advantage of doing that is I hate writing cover letters. And if you're referred by someone to HR, you don't have to write a cover letter.
Cool. Our next question is, I think for Devin and Christopher, someone that's really interested in consulting and the business side of science. And so consulting is a faster growing field, and that's a huge interest to lots of PhD students, also at Hopkins. So it can be mysterious to those who train as academics to want to switch to consulting. So how does the work, task, and the skills of a doctoral research really translate to consulting, and how they are insufficient or even a barrier?
So I can go ahead and start on this one. There's a lot I could say about all of this. I'll try and keep it concise. First of all, when you're looking at consulting, make sure you understand what sort of consulting you're looking at. If that's something that's, and so looking at life sciences consulting, or whether you're looking at the broader management consulting, which doesn't necessarily have, and I'm using again life science particularly here, doesn't have that life science bent to it, and so it's going to be a separate sort of conversation. I think consulting is a great position to take out of school because it's extremely broad-based, but also extremely applicable. You have a lot of skills that you'll be able to leverage there. I think we've talked a lot about the critical thinking pieces, the ability to take a lot of information and a lot of disparate information and, again, synthesize that into something coherent and intelligent and actionable. In the life science space specifically, PhD students have an advantage for those specific reasons. Where your disadvantage falls is the fact that nobody looks at a PhD and assumes that you're going to understand the business implications of what you're looking at there. And that may or may not be true in a particular circumstance, but it's something that you'll need to clearly articulate in any interviews that you have. And hey, I don't just know how to look at the research for this company, but I understand how that might translate into their decision making or their risk assessment or what have you. That's where doing some I was going to say internships, but I'm not necessarily advocating for that. Doing some experience learning along the way in grad school will pay off because you'll understand that for yourself, and you'll also have a case study of your own to be able to present to potential employers. I do just want to touch on the lifestyle aspects of that, and I guess as a broader part of the conversation, something that you want to think about is not just the skills involved in the position and not just the type of work there, but also the lifestyle that it affords. And I mean that both financially. Are you looking to go in? I mean, are your goals to make a lot of money? Is making some money? Is money not an issue there? Do you want to be able to live in certain parts of the country or others? Just think about those lifestyle considerations as you're looking at career paths alongside just the bullet points on the job listing itself, because those are relevant factors. I moved down to North Carolina from the Boston area for a number of different reasons, in part because I wanted somewhere that I could raise a family that had an environment here that was nice. I could have a yard, those sorts of things. I could afford to live here with very different salary requirements than I would in the Boston area. And then came those considerations as well as around, the specific companies and opportunities and all of that. Bringing it back to consulting, consulting is a very demanding job. The hours are long, they're unpredictable. The work is extremely exciting, but it's also extremely chaotic. There's a reason, as the cliche goes, A lot of people go into consulting as a job, but not as a career. You can burn out pretty easily in there, but you also get a ton of experience extremely fast. And like I said, it is very exciting in the work that you do. So it's an interesting career path. Happy to talk about that more. Christopher, I don't know what you found in your experience so far in the humanities side of this.
Yeah, I think I'd agree that it is a very high burn career, and that's why you just have sort of pretty high turnover rates that you'll see a lot of people who are in consulting for just a couple of years. I agree. What's nice about it is you get a lot of exposure that on a kind of daily basis, I'm talking to people that are sort of much higher on the totem pole than would probably be the case if I just gone straight into a university admin position, where I'd be talking to someone exactly one click above me. It's great to be able to talk to kind of provosts and presidents on a kind of regular basis. I realize I didn't answer the question about what skills I wish I'd acquired in grad school. I think one is teamwork, especially in the humanities. It can be kind of a solitary process, but I was really used to having ownership over my entire dissertation, with my advisor really taking the role of a kind of consultant rather than someone who's giving me kind of hard and fast rules for how to go about it. So cultivating those kind of teamwork experiences. I think too, balancing depth with breadth and learning how to gauge when one is more important than the other. In consulting, a lot of it is just the deadline. So you need to go deep enough to solve the client's problem, whereas in the PhD, you're going until you actually hit bedrock, and then you start to work up from that lacuna in the literature. So I think those are kind of two important transition points into consulting. It's also important to know that if you're interested in something like consulting for like intellectual reasons, you like that kind of variety, but you don't like to travel, consultant is not the only position in these organizations. All the major consultancies have research arms that provide kind of research support. So if you'd like to just be based in DC, you don't want to travel, you can work for that part of the organization and still kind of get that exposure without necessarily being in a formal consulting role. So I wouldn't necessarily think of it as monolithic. That the McKinsey experience isn't the only consulting experience, and it speaks to how important it is to talk to people at these companies, figure out what their day is like, and imagine whether or not that's a good match for you.
We are about to reach 1 hour. I think the last question that we can leave for Wiana, someone that's specifically interested and curious about your role in science policy. And the audience asked, what skills do you use in science policy that you learned in your STEM PhD? I think we touched a little bit on this. And the audience also curious about, is there opportunities for collaboration between government and academic research?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. And I left you all a note in the chat saying that if we don't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to me directly and I can help answer them. I'm happy to talk to anybody who is interested either in science policy or economic development and business development, which is what I'm doing right now, and just generally talk about my path. So please feel free to reach out to me. I think that, you know, this is kind of what we talked about before, how to explain to your cousin or to your mom what you do, right? When I was doing my PhD, I really couldn't explain to my parents what I was doing, but I got my explanation to my mom down pat. And I used to say, you know, I'm a scientist, I'm doing this. And I say now that I'm a scientist, I no longer do science in the lab, but I help other scientists do their science. And that's how I think about kind of everything that I've done to get me to where I am. I'm still trying to, you know, this is what policy is. You know, you're helping people who are actually in the lab or in the hospital or whatever, do what they need to do, whether that's, you know, influencing how grants are being written at the NIH, or, you know, helping the FDA with some particular topics or scientific topics that your members might know about, so that they have better understanding of the technologies that they're reviewing. I think that there's a big role for scientists to be involved in policy or law or business, because I think we have this, like we talked about training, we talked about the way we think. I think all of those skills are applicable to any career that requires well, critical thinking really, or communication, which pretty much all of them do. And for me, I think in terms of science policy, the biggest skill that I always relied on is communication. You know, write and I present orally probably every week, if not every other day, and that's something that is very useful in the kind of setting that we have and during our PhD training, where you have to present a paper, you have to do a journal club, you kind of have to make decisions, make executive decisions on what's the most important thing you got out of it and why. And you'll be able to, as long as you can back up the why, it doesn't matter if people don't agree. As long as if you show your work on how you got there, I think that is probably, in terms of when I was starting in government relations and policy, when I was providing technical expertise of why we're making a policy recommendation that a body needs to do this. Well, it's because the science says so. It's because a group of experts says so. It's because this is where the science is going, or this is what the reality is for people on the ground. So that kind of critical thinking and logic and being able to present it in a plainer English for non-technical people who are probably making these decisions is probably the biggest skill that I've used since I left my PhD training and as I was starting my science policy career.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for leaving context in the discussion box. And thank you for all the panelists and for sharing your experience and giving us your insights. And also thank you for all the audience joining us today. And thank you, everyone. That's about it for today. Have a nice day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Nice meeting everyone. Okay, guys.
Yeah.
This was great.
It was. It's so good to meet all of you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was fun. Let us know if we can do anything else, or if anybody contacts you.
Yeah.
Sure, I will. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
I think we're gonna have to leave this.
I know. I think you just have to close the.
Yeah.
you.